Now,
Okay, yes.
as you can
Now
see,
recording.
yes, it's now recording. A small introduction in Portuguese, only to say to the Portuguese that who are going to listen to this interview. Esta entrevista, então, com Jack Brabham, o piloto, mas também o homem, o filho de Jack Brabham, ele que é um empresário de sucesso e vem ao 16 válvulas, falar aqui um bocadinho da sua vida, ligado aos carros, ligado às corridas, mas também, por que não, falar um bocadinho do futuro. Obviamente, a entrevista vai ter que ser em inglês. So, first of all, thank you very much for the opportunity to have you here in 16 válvulas from Portugal, Mr. Brabham. We've got a lot to talk, but we don't have that much time for us to talk it. But we have got to start by talking a little bit about the past days. In this case, for example, I must record and recall that in this weekend, we are at the moment for signing that you have passed, or in this case, have passed 10 days from your father's passed away. But also with a special good memory also this weekend, because you have one race from GT Cup Championship. We're going to talk about it. But let's talk about the past days. I was thinking about, in this case, to talk a little bit about your father. What can you tell us about the Mr. Sir Jack Brabham? Once, I believe that he has no, or have not given many chances for these sons to be other thing but to be a driver. But am I wrong? First of all, thank you very much, Mr. Brabham. Welcome.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on the show here. So, yeah, what was my father like? Well, you know, he was my father. So for a lot of other people, he was a legend of motorsport, as we can, yeah, I mean, you know, globally recognized. Something that I guess, you know, when he retired, I was 5 years of age. So, you know, I didn't really get to see much of him race. And growing up as a kid in Australia, he was probably the most well-known person in Australia at that time. He was doing advertising for Goodyear on TV. He was doing advertising for tool companies. He had a car dealership, an aviation dealership, and he had a marina for boats dealership as well. So they were his three passions. And growing up as a kid, you know, I only saw him as my dad. I didn't really understand what he was like outside of that, because it just wasn't part of my world. It wasn't really till I obviously got older and then started racing myself that I started to really understand what he actually achieved, which even today I still think is quite mind-boggling in a sense of what he had done in motorsport, which very few people have ever done. You know.
Okay, even owning, in this case, a team that was working well, a championship, a world championship, is with his own name. That's not very common for us to see.
No, I mean, you know, that's probably his most famous claim to fame, I think, in Formula One is he's the only driver ever to have won a world championship in a car of his own construction. So no one's ever done that before. Some others have won Grand Prix, like Dan Gurney and Bruce McLaren. Yes. But in terms of a world championship, no, he's the only one. So very unique, very special to have that for Dad. So, you know, and of course, during that time, he and Ron Turanak, who was his designer and partner, became the biggest racing car manufacturer in the world in the 60s. So during the 60s, you know, they won Formula 2, they won all the junior categories with their cars, they won Formula 1, they won the Constructors' Championship. Very, very strong and powerful company at that time, you know, in motorsport. And it was at a time when motorsport was seen as a very special, elite kind of sport, where there wasn't a lot of competition like there is today. There's so many sports, so much stuff that people can see and get entertained by. But back then there wasn't as much. There was, here in the UK, there was probably football, cricket, and motor racing, and they were the main things. And of course, motor racing was dangerous. It drew a lot of people to it, and they became very much household names around the world because of that. And when I look back as a son and see what he was able to achieve, I'm super proud of what he was able to do. But he was still my father. We got on sometimes we didn't, just as any other family situation.
Yes. No barriers for you to start racing. He was not afraid and always cautious with you when you started racing.
Well, put it this way. I mean, when I was 13, I was in Sydney.
Yes.
I then got put onto an agricultural boarding school in the middle of Australia because we had a farm also. So I was being groomed to be a farmer. I was not being groomed to be a racing driver. I was far away from that as possible. And to be fair to him, I showed no interest.
Okay. And your brothers, Jeff, for example, no one in your family has tried to do so. Not even your brothers.
Obviously, yeah. Well, my brothers. By time I grew up and I was, I guess, how old was I? I was still in Sydney. So when I was still 13, my older brother was starting to race.
Okay.
And then my middle brother Gary, he started racing, but I never thought, oh, I'll want to be a racing driver. On the farm, I loved driving fast. That was for sure. In any farm vehicle, motorbike, it was from A to B as fast and as sideways as possible. I used to climb the highest trees on the farm. I used to climb the top of the roof. So the thrill of pushing myself
fearless
in a dangerous situation, that's what ticked my box, and I did a lot of driving on the farm. My dad never really saw that, and then I went to America to watch my older brother Jeff racing in America. He was doing Indy cars for the first time in 1982. I saw a go-kart for the very first time, a racing go-kart. Never even knew at 17 that people race go-karts. That's how far removed I was from racing. So Dad was very much not pushing, either of us to go racing. That had to come from us. Yes. And it did, So it wasn't until, after several go-kart races, and he saw me race at a place called Orange, and I won by half a lap in that sort of half wet, half dry situation. He thought then, okay, there's some talent here. Let's go and buy a new go-kart. Let's go and do it properly. And then that was the start of my real progression, I would say.
It will be forever in our memories, Mr. Jack Brabham. Okay, yes. Now it's time to talk about you, Mr. David. Until you reach Formula One, what can you tell us in a few moments and a few lines, as to say, until you reach the Formula One? You always kept on winning. What can you tell us about your best days in racing?
Yeah, sure. I mean, obviously I started racing in Australia, from go-karts to Formula Ford to Formula 2 in Australia, and Formula Atlantic in New Zealand, in America, Formula 3 in Argentina for a few races.
Okay.
I won the Australian Gold Star in Formula 2 in 1987, and that kind of launched me to come over here to the UK to race, and in Europe. I was sponsored by Canal Cigarettes because they were sponsoring Sons of Famous Drivers. So it got me an opportunity to come over here and race in Vauxhall Lotus, which was the first year of that, racing against, people like, Mika Hakkinen and Alan McNish and those guys. And then I didn't like it. It didn't really suit me. It was like, for me, having driven Formula Atlantic cars to then driving a Vauxhall Lotus was a bit like going from Formula 3 to Formula Ford. It was a big drop down in pace, and didn't like it. And I actually nearly thought I was going home because I just lost motivation, wasn't going well. Everybody could see it. And then my dad, with the help of Camel and the race team I was with, took me over to Formula 3 Class B halfway through that year in 1988. And then that changed everything. You know, I won the last 5. I won 5 out of 7 races and finished 3rd in that championship with only doing half the series. Then I won a drive in 1989 and won the British F3 Championship and the World Cup at Macau, the Formula 3 World Cup. So I got my super license. And then I signed for Middlebridge to do Formula 3000 with David Hill as my teammate.
Okay. And did you felt at home in Great Britain in this case? Because you were born there, but then flew also to Australia, and then returning, you kept keeping on at home when you race, and you were staying there in the United Kingdom?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, you know, I came over here for a career and to see how far I could get. Not knowing how long that would be, whether I'd be going home very quickly or not, I just didn't know. I just went into every race trying to do the best I can. And, you know, I had a super successful Formula 3 year, and that launched me to 3000. But, you know, the Middlebridge bought the Brabham F1 team. And obviously my father had long got out of the Brabham Formula 1 team back in 1970, at the end of 1970. So the name carried on. Bernie Eccleston obviously was the main one behind the company for many years, and won a couple of world championships with Nelson Piquet, as we talked about earlier. And, you know, I actually walked into the very first, well, let's put it this way, we were testing the next day with the new cars for 3000, and then I got told that they were canning the F3000 program. No more. Why? Because they wanted to focus all their money and energy to Formula 1.
Okay.
But by that time, they'd done 2 F1 races, and they wanted to replace one of them with me. So that I had the option to go and find another 3000 drive or become a Brabham Formula 1 driver.
The next step, it was obviously Formula 1.
Yeah.
So decision was made easily. It was a decision made easily.
Well, I mean, I guess at that time, yeah. I mean, if I go back to the very first round at Phoenix, it was the first round of the 1990 championship was at Phoenix. Now, I'd signed for Middlebridge. Obviously, they bought Brabham. They were racing in Phoenix. And I got a call literally the same week of the race saying, how would you like to come over and do the Grand Prix? And I just sat there for a moment and I thought, I know I'm not fit enough. I haven't driven the car. I don't know the circuit. And I wasn't convinced that I could do the job needed to maximize the situation. I just didn't feel I was ready. And I said, no. I said, no, I'm not ready. And
courageous decision.
Well, you know, it was an honest, yeah. I mean, it was an honest decision.
Obviously.
Yeah, and then obviously fast forward after 2 rounds, and then going to Imola, they wanted me to be the driver. So I had no other option other than to be a Formula 1 driver. And I thought, you know what, I've done some testing in 3000 now. I felt up to speed with that. I felt confident that I could have won that championship. And then moving into Formula 1 didn't seem too big a decision. You know what I mean? So obviously we did the deal, and I was announced as the driver and did the 1990 season after, you know, from round 3 onwards.
Yes, it was a different times, as to say, because there were the need for pre-qualifying, because there were a lot of drivers, and I've got to choose, I've got a percentage to be there in the starting grid, right? For example, right?
Yes, that's correct. I mean, there were 30 cars going for 26 spaces in the normal qualifying, but before that, you had pre-qualifying, very early morning. Now, Brabham had had a fairly successful 1989 season where they didn't need to pre-qualify. So all I had to do was get out of the last four into the main qualifying, which wasn't always easy. You know, you got to remember in 1989-90, the financial crisis hit around the world. Japan in particular was hit hard. All of a sudden, what money was available was no longer available for the Formula One team. So that whole year, we ran with very little money. We didn't know if we were making the next race. The engines were not paid for. You know, we weren't going racing until someone paid for the engines. That would happen at the last minute. And it was just that kind of year, which was really disappointing from my side, thinking the Brabham F1 team had a good year in 89. So then I was like, right, okay, this could be a good time for me to be in Formula One. But I walked into a nightmare, to be fair. So we were very lucky to get to all the way through the end of the season, but we couldn't test. There was no development. The car was unreliable. It wasn't quick enough. And all the effort really behind the team was with my teammate, Stefano Modena, which I understand. But for me, that meant I didn't get anywhere near the equal equipment. You know what I mean? So it was a very tough year from that point of view.
And 1991, it was easier since the stuff started in 1990. It was a good way for ending the season and starting in 1991.
Well, in 91, I actually didn't continue in Formula One. I actually went back to Formula 3000 with Team Roney. I did a few races with them. And then I got an offer to race for Jaguar in the World Endurance Championship in the XJR14 Silk Cut Jag, which was a great opportunity for me. And that was my first introduction to a well-funded professional team capable of winning a world championship. So that was a great experience for me. And I drove two cars. I started in one car and finished in the other in a 3-hour race. So Derek
Can you tell us something about that story, because it's very interesting?
Yeah, I mean, Tom Walkinshaw only had 3 drivers, and I was replacing Martin Brundle. Okay. Martin was doing Formula One, and some of the races clashed, so they put me in to replace him. And the first race was at the Nürburgring. And it was a very successful weekend. And I actually finished first and second because I started in one car and finished in the other. Okay. It's something odd for these days, but back in that time, it was very easy to do. Okay. So no Formula One, 1991, 92? No, 93. So the next time I was in Formula One was 94 with Simtek.
Okay. When you signed for Simtek. Before starting the season, it was a difficult negotiation to be there at that time, because
No. I mean, obviously I'd heard that there was a new team entering Formula One, and they wanted me as the driver because of my experience in Formula One and sports cars at that time, which obviously I drove for Jaguar, Toyota, back to Jaguar, and then obviously from that time I was 20, 27, 28 years of age, and they were looking for someone with some experience to help them get the new team up and running. So that's where I signed for them. And then, of course, Roland Ratzenberger was our second signing, which we were all excited about at the time.
And how was it for the first 4 races? The team always improving? What did you find at this team? Because you were, as you have said, the experienced guy in the team. What did you find in this case, in the Simtek in 1994? Before, as we know well, the weekend from the 1st of May.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it was a new team, and Nick Worth was the chief designer. He was the owner. He was 28, similar age to me.
Yes.
So, a massive undertaking at that age to go off and do Formula One. That's for sure. But it was a good team, good little team. Obviously with Roland there, with his experience in sports cars, and we went off to Brazil. I managed to qualify for the race. Roland didn't. And then obviously we went to Japan at Aida.
Right.
Yeah, so we both qualified. I didn't finish, but he did, so he got a finish. I got a finish at Brazil, so we had two cars that had finished the first 2 rounds, which was a bit like a victory for us, to be fair, because it wasn't easy to have a new car that was reliable. It wasn't fast; it was down the back. Each race, because we didn't have the money to test, we did a lot of our testing at the races. So we kept improving, and then of course when we got to Imola, we were very much looking forward to Imola because of what we'd learnt in the first 2 rounds. And then of course everything went haywire after that because of Roland's accident. And it was just a very bad weekend that we were very much part of, and lost Roland.
Yes. What can you tell us about the team, but also by the weekend, because you were there, you were participating at this Grand Prix from the 1st of May, obviously, but the weekend it was completely odd. We hope never to see something like that, but it was all started very badly in the Friday or even the Thursday with the accident from Rubens Barrichello. What can you tell us? Because you were there and you have the insight, and you can give us an idea of what was racing there, but also racing at the same team as Roland in Simtek. What can you tell us, Mr. David Brabham?
Just hang on 1 second.
Yes, you are trying to find, okay.
Yeah, no.
You are trying to find some light?
Yes.
In order, okay. I didn't want to interrupt you, but...
Yeah. How about that?
But it's completely different. No way. It was the need for that light. So, in this moment, what can you tell us?
Well, I mean, we know there was no feeling of a bad weekend coming. It was, everyone was excited. Everyone's back in Europe. I guess the first 2 rounds were, Brazil and Japan. We had learned a lot from what we'd done in those 2 races. We were looking forward to keep improving the vehicle, to move up the grid, make it easier to qualify. And then obviously Rubens Barrichello had his big accident in practice, which I think was the first, oh, wow, that was a big one. That don't normally see accidents like that. And what we didn't know at the time, that set the scene for the whole weekend, because it was just one big accident and disaster after another. It got worse, obviously. Luckily, Rubens was okay. He couldn't race, but he was alive, and everyone was concerned about him, but pleased he was okay. And then, of course, on Saturday, shockwaves around the whole of Formula One and around the world, that Roland Ratzenberger died in an accident. And we were, having not ever experienced losing a teammate like that, it's very difficult to really comprehend what was going on at the time. It was hard to sort of go, is this happening? Is this real? All the emotions, all the feelings are very different to how you would normally have at a racetrack. And it was difficult to know what to do. Very difficult. Obviously, when the news came through that he died, everybody was devastated. And it just made it very difficult to know what to do the next day. Do we race? Do we not race? That decision was mine. I was never pressured to race. I wanted to make sure that my car was safe, obviously. And the team, it's one of those moments where if I had said to the team, I don't trust you, I'm not racing, that would have been very difficult for all of us to recover from for the rest of the season.
Obviously.
So for me, I had to put a leap of faith in the team, was one. I did the warm-up. I decided to do the warm-up, and I came into the pits after the warm-up, and I noticed there was a slight lift in the team, very slight, but a little slight lift. And I felt I had to race for the team. I had to keep this going. As far as I was concerned, Roland would be yelling at me saying, what are you doing? You're a racer. Keep racing, as I would on the other side. You know what I mean?
You have told your family to say what to do, or it was your own decision without?
Well, I mean, my wife was there at the time, but she was also pregnant with our first son, and obviously had a lot of conversations with her. But of course, at the end of the day, I spoke to my mum, I spoke to my dad. Now they were obviously in their careers. In terms of Formula One and racing, they lost a lot of friends in racing. So they'd had a different take on it. And it was less emotional. It was matter of fact. That's how it was. It's a dangerous sport. You can either stop or keep going, and, I was a racer and still am a racer. But I felt racing on was the right way to remember Roland, put it that way.
Always with an Austrian flag in your car, for example, for the memory, or were you preparing something? I was wondering if you have prepared something special in order for Roland when you finished the Grand Prix.
Yeah, I had an Austrian flag in the car, but I didn't finish the race. So that didn't really happen. But I have to say, when I finished the race, I mean, I had a problem in the race. I had a steering failure in the race. So I was very lucky myself to get away from that weekend alive. And I just wanted the weekend to finish. Wanted it to finish.
Everyone, because the starting line and the starting from the Grand Prix was also with a crash, a big crash.
That's right.
Involving also JJ Leto, Pedro Lamy, also the incident with Michele Alboreto at the pit. How did you live that emotions also at the race?
I think I'm not alone in thinking this, but I think everybody in Formula One, by the time they got to the end of that weekend, your head's spinning. You know what I mean? You just cannot comprehend what just happened. You can't absorb it. And then, of course, we heard the news about Ayrton. And, of course, that was an even bigger reaction around the world, of course, because of who he was and how important he was to Brazil as well. And, an absolute legend. Everybody was in shock, total shock.
And 1 week only after that, another big crash with Carl Van Lingen.
That's correct.
At Monaco.
We all went to Monaco, and obviously it was still very fresh in everybody's mind. And then, of course, Carl has his accident coming out of the tunnel, and then he's in a coma. You know what I mean? And we don't even know if he's going to survive.
Right.
It was a horrible time for Formula One. But I always say this: yes, it was very horrible. We lost 2 great drivers, but at the same time, it altered the course of safety within the sport
completely.
And there are a lot of drivers that can thank what happened in regards to those safety changes that saved their lives, because the emphasis was on safety for the circuits much more than it was before. The cockpit the helmets, the harness devices, everything. All of a sudden, safety became much more of a topic, where before it was, and I was guilty of this, and I probably still am, because, you know, it's danger, and that's what excites me a bit, because it is dangerous. But you get a bit blasé too about it as well. So for me, you know, it was a bit of a wake-up call, to remind yourself that, hey, hang on, this is a dangerous sport.
Obviously.
To treat it with respect, but not allow the emotions to get in the way of you pushing the car to the limit and stuff like that. But I think the good thing that came out of all of that was really the safety push that saved a lot of drivers' lives after that.
Yes, unfortunately, it has to happen, this crash and the incidents, for us to improve the security. I'm recalling from the city's son that was at Brands Hatch also died, but then they have created in there, they have obliged for the halo, and then more lives were saved by, in this case, using halo. Halo, I believe that in English
the
is
halo. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Here in Portugal, we say halo.
No doubt that saved a lot of people as well.
Let's talk a little bit with more offensive things. Let's forget the bad times, but we have got to remind, because we don't have much more time. But I want to know how it was for you to win in Le Mans. In this case, in 2029. In this case, you won with the team Peugeot. What can you tell us? Which are the memories from 2009? Now that is correct. 2009 winning in Le Mans.
Well, I mean, it was obviously a dream come true, an amazing experience. I'd won in 2007 and 8 with Aston Martin in GT1.
Yes.
And I always remember being on the podium and then coming off the podium and then seeing the overall winners go up. Now, when I was on the podium in 7 and 8 with Aston Martin, it was the most amazing experience. You finished the race, you'd won. You see all those people just out there in front of you on the podium cheering, and all the flags, and, you know, it's such an amazing experience. It really is. The atmosphere is just superb. And, you know, I kept thinking, you know, what's it like to win overall? Because it's an amazing feeling when you win in class, you know.
Yes.
And at that time, I never thought I was going to get an opportunity to win overall, because I was getting older, and the opportunities were getting less in the prototype categories for me. So I didn't really think about it, to be fair. I just thought, wow, it must be an amazing experience. Now, another financial crisis was hitting the world in 2008 and 9. Yeah. And so when it came to 2009, I'd already signed my agreement prior to that. I think it was 2008, 3-year contract of racing in America with Honda, with the Acura program. And that was on and that was off, and it was on and off for the 2009 season. And then it was on. So it's great. Luckily, we were going to have a season out of it. And then I went to Sebring to do the first test, and woke up in the morning to an email from Peugeot. And I was like, second take, and then I read it, and it said, it was very simple. Dear David, what is your availability for Le Mans? You know what I mean? And I'm like, I had to read it again. You know what I mean? And at the time, I wasn't contracted to do Le Mans with Honda because they weren't doing it. So I went back and said, well, yes, I'm available, but obviously I've got to have permission by my team and permission by Honda.
The sponsors and all the things.
Yeah, and so they came back and said, well, you know, let us know if you can get confirmation of being allowed to do it. So obviously I spoke to the team. The team straight away said, absolutely brilliant. 2 days later, you know, Honda, by the time it's gone through all the hierarchy, they all said, yeah, absolutely. I flew to Paris after the test, sat down with Serge and Bruno Famine, who's obviously now at
yes, Bruno Famine. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I always remember sitting there with Bruno, and he had a very sort of stern face on, and he looked at me and he said, "I'm uncomfortable with you being a driver for Peugeot." And the reason for that is because they were in P1 and Honda were in P1 in terms of the class. So at Sebring, we would be racing against each other. And so he was concerned that obviously I might then tell Honda what Peugeot are doing. You know what I mean? It's all that sort of thing. So you can see the nervousness. And I just said to him, I said, the fact that I'm actually sitting here in front of you must tell you how I go about my racing. And he just sort of looked at me and went, okay. And I did the deal. It got announced and I went off testing. And I remember the first time I got in that Peugeot was at Barcelona. We were doing a 30-hour test. Now I did 3 30-hour tests for Peugeot from February to June.
Okay.
And I didn't do all of them. That's how intense the program was. They had to win Le Mans. It was that simple. And I remember getting in the car for the first time, and I drove out of the pits and accelerated to turn 1 for the very first time. And I had a grin from ear to ear because the torque and the power that this thing had just catapulted me down the straight. That by the time I got to the end of that straight to turn right into the first corner for the very first time, I said in my head, I can win Le Mans with this car.
Okay.
Yeah.
Previously. Okay.
Yeah. So obviously from the race point of view, it was fascinating and interesting because talking about the Peugeot politics and dynamics within that team, you could immediately see there was way too much pressure for them to win. And I was very lucky because I was with Alex Wirtz and Mark Genet.
Mm-hmm.
And we were 3 old guys. We were not the favoured people in the team. So we could actually go off and do our own thing and not get tied into the pressures of the politics and everything that was going on with the other 2 cars. And of course, we were not full-time employees. We were just people that just came in and for that race, where the others were fighting for their jobs. The pressure for them to be the fastest was so intense that they were making mistakes.
Obviously.
And they were not seeing the big picture. So we felt if we just did our job and we did it well, we weren't the fastest, but we made 0 mistake. We had the least amount of time in the pits for the whole race, and we ended up winning. So it was a slightly different strategy to how you would normally do it, but it worked perfectly. And to stand up on that podium, 3 years in a row, and I stood there and I'm looking out and I'm going, it doesn't feel any different to when you win the class. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Felt no difference at all. The only thing I would say is, at that point, I said to myself, okay, it's actually not about the trophy. It's about the journey to get there. The hard work, the dedication, your family support, all the different teams you've raced for, all the teammates, all the mechanics, all the people that have helped develop you into the person that you are, and been on that journey with you, to stand there winning Le Mans with that trophy. I looked at the trophy and I thought, that's really cool. But what's even better was the journey to get to pick that
with the French team at the French Grand Prix, as to say.
Yeah, absolutely. And, my brother Jeff won for Peugeot as well. So, the 2 times they'd won Le Mans in that era was 2 Brabhams in it. So it's kind of bizarre in one way, but obviously fantastic memories and something, you know, I'm proud of as a driver. And the good thing is also, you know, Dad never won Le Mans, so at least he gave us something to win without with a Brabham.
So now it's the time for talking about Brabham bus for nowadays, because you were winning yesterday. I believe it was yesterday, Sunday. You have won in the GT Cup Championship with a Brabham car.
Yep.
What can you tell us? It was to cry with emotion by winning one car from the family with this sustained fuel. What can you tell us about this year 2024?
Well,
before talking about the future, we will be able to talk about the future, but let's talk about yesterday.
Yeah, I mean, yesterday was very special because it was the 10th anniversary of when my father passed away. So Sunday, 19th of May. And I was racing in GT Cup and I'm doing the season. I haven't done a proper season of racing since 2012, so nice to get back in the car, get back into a championship. And I was racing the Brabham BT62, which was made out of Adelaide, Australia. And, you know, Paul Bailey, my teammate, owns the car. He wanted to race it this year. Wasn't ready for the first round. So we drove a Lamborghini, and then we got the Brabham specially out for this one. And of course, the stars aligned. You know, I mean, we're racing the Brabham at Brands Hatch. There's the main straight there is called Brabham Straight.
Right.
And you know, I passed the leader for the lead of that race on Brabham Straight and crossed the line with the Brabham in a Brabham on Brabham Straight on the 10th anniversary of my father. I mean, you could not get the stars aligned as well as that. You know what I mean? So it was quite emotional actually, because I got on the radio and I thanked the team, and you know, my teammate Paul, who's an amateur, did a fantastic job and got us the opportunity to fight for the win. And all I had to do is just sort of go like hell and get past the guys in front and get the win, and we did that. And then at the end of my sort of thank you to everyone, I just said, "And this one's for you, Dad." And then that was it. I started crying in the helmet.
obviously, yeah. It had got to be like that one. Okay. What about the future from, in this case, David Brabham, but also for the Brabham Automotivo? I believe it's the team's name nowadays.
Yeah. So obviously, I drove a customer car, the 5062. Now we started this project back in 2018, and unfortunately, the situation was where we didn't align with our partners at all with the project, and it wasn't going anywhere, and we felt it was best we went our separate ways. So at the moment, there's no production of the BT62 or the BT63 GT2 car with the Brabham name on it. So we're now looking at what the next phase of that project would be. So with different partners and so forth, because, you know, it's such a great project, had so much potential, and for it to move forward, we had to go through this change. Mm-hmm. And, you know, it's just great to be out there racing the Brabham. And as you said, you know, we're running on sustained fuel, which is a biofuel made from farming waste, like straw. And the GT80 product that they've got is a 102 octane, perfect for the Brabham BT62 engine, which is a 5.4 litre V8. Sounds great, car looks great, it's running great, and you know, with me racing this year in it and doing well, it keeps the story going, it keeps the momentum going, and obviously we're working hard to try and get the next chapter of that project up and running.
Okay. And what about the next generation from Brabham drivers? Can we expect in a few years to have another generation from Brabham?
Yeah,
guys?
I mean, well, yeah, for sure. You know, Matthew is my older brother Jeff's his son. He's been racing for a number of years now in America. He won the F2000 championship. He won the Star Mazda championship. He did the 100th running of the Indy 500. He's done stadium truck racing, which he's a champion of multiple times. And he's racing in IMSA this year in P2. And my son, Sam's actually lives in Australia, lives in Melbourne. And he's racing in the GT Cup, in the GT4 championship, SRO GT4 championship in Australia. So there's three, and my older brother Jeff is racing in historic racing in a Brabham in America as well. So we've got three groups of Brabhams in three different countries, all racing. So the name continues, put it that way.
Yes, it's the surname from Brabham Motorsport. It's the same. Brabham Motorsport, and Brabham. It is interconnected.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Mr. David, it was such a pleasure for me to have you here in 16 Válvulas. I have to thank you for the opportunity. It was a special date, but with a lot of commemoration, as to say. And I've got to give you the congratulations for the result from yesterday, and for sharing with us your memories. And I hope for the future. I hope the future will bring all that you want. But for myself, I have to thank you for this opportunity. And I wish you also good races in the future, Mr. David Brabham. It was such a pleasure. Hope to hear from you.
Thank you very much for having me and having the chat and talking about all those subjects. It's always good to talk to people like yourself who have knowledge about the sport and are passionate about it. So it's great to be on the show. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. Hope to hear from you. Bye-bye.
Bye.